Hi everyone, it's Kelly here and welcome to my channel. Welcome back if you have been before. Lovely to have you either way. On this channel we talk books, and today I am giving you my wrap up of the books that I read in the month of October. Starting with, on a frivolous note, with this fabulous book, Tits, Boobies and Loons and Other Birds Named by People Who Clearly Hate Birds. This I found in an independent bookshop that when I was traveling and I couldn't go past it. I picked it up on my way out of the store, as I was coming up to the till to pay for my books, and just could not. I just could not walk past it. It has these gorgeous illustrations of these birds, then followed by their name and a little comment, which I found very amusing as I was going through the book. So highly recommended. I gave it 4 stars, and at the back of the book it has a find your bird name. Mine is a flappy slack-jawed babbler, so that's a bit of fun. So highly recommended if you can get your hands on this. It's by Royall, and I loved it. It was great. Second book that I read in the month of October was Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. This was my first Capote book that I have read. I don't know what I was expecting going in. I haven't seen the film before, and I sort of had vague notions of what the book was about, and knew about the character of Holly Golightly, but as I hadn't seen the film, I didn't know how things were going to go. I also was really surprised to find that I did not like the character of Holly. She's manipulative. She brings out the worst in people. She is a slob. And just, I didn't find her likable at all. And although there is an explanation of why she is the way she is, eventually in the book, it really wasn't enough to make me like her. And if I knew her in real life, I would probably cut her out of my life, because toxicity. So yeah, that was surprising to me, but I did overall enjoy this book. I gave it 3.75 stars. My edition also had some short stories in it as well. The favorite of those, they were sort of a bit of a mixed bag, I thought, but my favorite one is called A Christmas Memory, and I'm going to hopefully get a chance to reread it at Christmas time because I enjoyed that short story immensely. So yeah, I would recommend this if you haven't read it before. Content warning, there is some racism in here that is sort of its time, so just be aware of that going in. The next book that I read, I don't have a copy of. It's called Books That Made Us by Reinecke, and this is a book that accompanied a TV series that I didn't watch, but I read the book. But the TV series was about the history of books published in Australia. So it's sort of our literary history and sort of what made us what we are today, in literary terms. So the book was accompanies the TV show. So I don't know to what depth it went into in the TV show, whether there was more or different content in that show. But in the book, it's going sort of from the earliest days of publishing in Australia and books that were available to us here in Australia, Australian writers and what they needed to do to get by, through to the present day. So this book I enjoyed. I gave it 3.25 stars. Some of the things I loved about it was that it introduced me to some books that I'd not heard of before, particularly older books that are part of our Australian literary canon, if you will. And I'm glad for those recommendations, because it did talk you through what the books were about and, sort of the importance of those books at the time. So I added a lot of books to my TBR from this book. It was also interesting to learn about the historic and political context in which books were written in Australia and how that evolved over time. And also learning about the publishing industry was an interesting part of this book, and how things had changed, and about literary journals that existed and still exist in Australia. So bits I didn't like about it was that each time it talked about a particular book, it gave a blow-by-blow summary of what happens in the book that was far too long, and also spoiled the ending of the book. So it tells you exactly what happens in the book. And first of all, I felt that was really unnecessary. And second of all, it was boring. So it wasn't interesting to listen to a blow-by-blow description of what happens in the book. Just give us a brief summary, and don't spoil books. Why would you do that? That was frustrating. Also, at the end of the book, when we're heading more into the modern day, it seemed like the only criteria for selection of the books that were talked about, because by its nature, it couldn't talk about every single important book that was ever written in Australia. It would be far too long, though there were some notable omissions, I will say. The more modern books seemed to be, the entirety of the selection criteria was that it won the Miles Franklin Award, which, if you've been on this channel, you will have heard me speaking about before. I'm currently reading through this year's long list, and I'm most of the way through that now. And for those who are not in Australia or who don't know, the Miles Franklin, I would say, is probably our most well-known and prestigious literary award that we have in Australia. So, obviously some really good books win the Miles Franklin. However, there are lots of other really good books too that perhaps were nominated for the Miles Franklin and didn't win. So, it would have been nice to sort of have a little bit more variety, because, I can look through the list of the Miles Franklin winners quite easily and go and find those. I want to know about books that were sort of like hidden gems that, turned out to be important in the scheme of things. So, and really added something to our literary culture. So, yeah, towards the end, I felt like the beginning part of the book, where it was talking the very, quite historic context, was very well researched and very interesting, whereas the more modern, it seemed like the author just kind of went to a list and just picked out the Miles Franklin winners. Frustrating, I thought. I listened to this one on audiobook, and it was narrated by Claudia Carmen, who is the presenter, the actress presenter of the TV show. So it was good to hear. I quite like her. So she was a good reading voice for this text. So 3.25 stars for that one. Then I got to a classic that I've been meaning to get to for a long time, which is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I enjoyed this book. I gave it 3.75 stars. It was less spooky than I anticipated. There was a lot about the ethics of science, and surprisingly, I think it speaks to the entitlement of men, and what they feel like is owed to them. In terms of women. So I was quite surprised that, some themes, modern themes, were coming out in this quite old book. The descriptions of the scenery were far too long in this. We get it. Geneva is beautiful. So much description of the scenery and how, refreshing and beautiful it was. In between action moments, it felt like fluff. So that was disappointing. I'm also not sure I truly believed, or could, suspend my disbelief, that not only had Frankenstein created life, but that the fiend was so quick to learn and also had superhuman strength and speed and those kind of things. It didn't feel like that had been set up enough as to why that was the case. So that was a tricky aspect of this book for me. A lot is left to the imagination, which, could be considered a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you take things. But otherwise, it was an enjoyable read. I would like to try, I think, an abridged audiobook that I found when I was looking for it. So I listened to this one on audiobook. I can't remember the name of the narrator that I listened to. But while I was looking for which audiobook I was going to listen to, I found an abridged version that was read by Kenneth Branagh. And I think I but it's abridged, so it was sort of only 2.5 hours or something in that vicinity. So I'm guessing that they took out a lot of the fluff and just kept the action. So that, I think, would be a good way to read this book. So I think maybe in future I will try that audiobook of the abridged version and see how it compares to this one. So yeah, given that it's, you know, less than half the length of the other versions, I'm sure a lot of fluff has been removed. But yeah, overall, I did enjoy this book. So again, I gave it 3.75 stars. But yeah, it could have done with a bit of an edit and a bit less description of the countryside, I felt. The next book that I read was one of the Miles Franklin long list that I was just talking about before. And that is 7.5 by Christos Tsiolkas. This copy is, I believe, an ARC. Yeah, because it says Nov, so it came out November last year, I guess. And I did not enjoy this book. I ended up giving it 2 stars. They can't all be winners. And I'm sure that other people, there were mixed reviews about this book. So I was going into it expecting to sort of be on one side or the other. And I ended up being on the side that I just didn't enjoy this book at all. So I'm very glad that I will no longer have to be reading all about a man enjoying the smell of his own sweaty armpits, to be honest. You would be surprised at the amount of times that comes up in this book. I thought it was pretentious, poorly conceived, and, well, specifically, the poorly conceived part was the subplot. So let me sort of give you a little summary. So basically, this is a book about a man who is the author. So it's semi-autobiographical, I guess, writing a book. And the book is that he's writing in this book is about an ex-porn star doing one last job for a lot of money. And I thought that it was stupid. The premise of the story was stupid, and also the bits that were written in there were stupid. So like the bits where he's talking about actually doing the writing, like, you know, and the surrounding parts of him being where he is and talking about nature and all of those kind of things were okay. But this subplot of this story that he's writing inside the book is stupid. So yeah, it was, yeah. Yeah, so the descriptive passages about nature were the only grace of this book, but it wasn't enough to save it. So I'm glad that it's over. Every time I was coming to it, I was like, why am I continuing to read this book? It's, you know, I'm literally just reading this because I said to myself, I'm going to read all of the long list of the Miles Franklin. And I just did not like this one. This is the second one that I've really disliked out of the long list, but there have been some really good gems. So I'm hoping that I've got 2 more to go. I'm partway through one. And I'm hoping that those will be better. So yeah, that was a bit of a disappointment for this month. Other than that, we've had a good month. All right, the next book that I read, I don't have a physical copy of. It's The Woman in the Library by Sulari Gentill. I really enjoyed this. It's a murder mystery, and it's sort of a not exactly a locked room mystery, but it's sort of mysterious in the fact that nobody could work out, you know, when the crime was committed and how it was committed because, you know, there were people around. So I enjoyed this. It was very compelling. I listened to the audiobook version of this book, and the inception structure of this book within a book, within a book, within a book was very interesting. And I was explaining the structure of this book to my husband, and I had to like draw it on a notepad to explain what was going on. So I'm not going to do that now. Actually, do I still have the picture? I have the notebook that I did it in right here, but I don't know if I pulled it out. Maybe. I do. Okay, so here's my diagram. So we have the author, Sulari Gentill. She has written a book about an author called Hannah, who is in Australia, and she is corresponding with a man called Leo who lives in Boston, because she's writing a book set in Boston and Leo is in Boston. So there's letters. We don't often see letters from Hannah to Leo. We just see the correspondence that he sends back to her. So that's the book within a book. Then Hannah is writing a book here about a character called Freddie, that's short for Winifred. And we start the book of Freddie in the Boston Public Library, where she meets some characters called Cain, Marigold, and Wit. But then she's writing a book. So Freddie is also an author writing a book, and she uses those three characters as characters in her book, and she calls them Cain, handsome guy, Marigold, Freud girl, and Wit, strong chin. So, author, 4-book structure. Yeah, that's my little diagram. So that's basically a summary of what goes on. Now, I thought Freddie was a great protagonist, and I loved the vibes in the book. It almost had the feel of like a cozy mystery, but it wasn't like set in a small town. It's set in Boston, so it's a little bit more gritty than that. And also the letters from Leo to the author Hannah were another great plot device in the book. So it was really enjoyable. I don't read a heap of murder mystery books. I like them, and I probably would like to read more, and I have more on my shelves. But yeah, if you were someone who was deep into that, I don't know whether or not it would be the right vibe for you, but I really enjoyed it. Okay, so then we come to a book that I borrowed from. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a teacher, and I borrowed a book from my school library. So you'll see on the cover that I've covered up my school library barcode so I don't dox myself. So the book is called Catherine Called Birdy, and it was a Newbery Honour book by Karen Cushman. So a new movie, I think, has come out on Amazon Prime about this book. And when I saw the ad for it, I was like, oh, that looks cool. I haven't actually watched the film yet. And I was like, where have I heard that title before? And in the school library, there's a teacher resource room that has a photocopier in it. And so while I'm photocopying things, I'm often kind of like looking around the room, and at my eye level is a set of these books. So that's where I had seen it before. So I was like, oh, well, the trailer for the film looked really interesting. So I thought I would read the book before I watched the show. And it was great. I loved it. I ended up giving it 5 stars. So the character, Catherine, her nickname is Birdy. So it's set in 1290, but she's sort of like a feisty young girl, a rebel before her time, who is sort of stuck in what is expected of her, and it's just not her personality at all. So she's, I think, the daughter of a knight. I may be misremembering that, but he's sort of a minor nobleman, I guess, who has land that he sublets to, peasants who have to pay him in, I guess, produce. So he's sort of like supposed to have this caring aspect to him where he takes care of his tenants, but he's a bit of a jerk. And he's also trying to marry Catherine off, and she's, I'm pretty sure, 13. So at its time, that was, I guess, normal. But yeah, to a modern reader, it's a bit eye-opening. So she's having none of it, though. And it's very funny in places and very thoughtful in other places as well, and was just overall very enjoyable. And I would highly recommend if you've not read this one before. All right, the last book that I read in the month of October was Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, which was edited by Carmen Maria Machado with footnotes, and also she wrote an introduction for it as well. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It's a gorgeous edition, and I specifically sought this one out. It has French flaps, really beautiful artwork on the front, and I also have read other things by Carmen Maria Machado that I very much enjoyed. So it was a quick read. It's a very short book, and I somewhat enjoyed it. I think the authorial choice to tell the story from Laura's perspective was a shame, and a limitation of the book, because it also impacted the ending, because Laura was not there to see some of the, I don't want to give spoilers. She wasn't there for an aspect of the ending that was quite important. So we don't actually get to know, other than through documentation that she has later read about what happened. So that, I felt, meant that the ending of the book was more kind of rushed and not as well explored as other parts of the book. So it ended up being a sort of detached retelling of what had happened because she was not there, and which made it a bit of an unsatisfactory conclusion, unfortunately. But I did otherwise enjoy the book and the characters, and I thought that I'm glad that I read it, and so it's, a thing that I've read, a classic that I've read, and I would recommend that you read it. It's a very short read, but it wasn't all I had hoped that it would be. So that's it. That is my month of October. I read some books. I enjoyed most of them. Not so much this one. Glad it's over. But it was a successful reading month for me, and I'm very glad that I had the opportunity, because I really thought that October was going to be far too busy for me to get leisure reading done. So I'm glad that I made it through most of my TBR. So I'll be back again very shortly with some more content. I've got lots of books to share with you that I recently purchased or acquired in some way. So that will probably be my next video, will be a book haul. So look out for that, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.